Excelsior, true believers! You are about to embark upon a journey, a trip to the 70s and 80s when mighty Marvel Comics ruled over all. The Defenders, Doctor Strange, the Champions, Deathlock, the Submariner, the Incredible Hulk, Killraven, the Son of Satan, the Macabre Man-Thing, and all your other Bronze Age favorites every week appearing on Defenders Dialogue. Now here are your guides, Christopher Golden and Brian Keene.
I am not going to say Excelsior to our true believers today, Brian. We're starting this episode slightly differently. For the first time in Defenders Dialogue history, I'm not going to fucking say Excelsior. Because I want to talk a little bit about, and again, like I'm going to say, and I know you may be reluctant to do this, and I know it's not the whole brief episode we're going to do today, but I want to talk about comic books and all these people who constantly say, no politics, no politics. And Brian, I got to tell you something, man. I don't understand how anyone who grows up as a fan of genre fiction in comics, in books, in movies, in TV can grow up and see what's happening right now in this country and or ever in the past when these instances have arisen and not understand which side they're on.
I'm not reluctant to talk about that at all, and I'm not sure why you'd think I would be.
Well, I don't, because I know that we've tried our best to keep Defenders Dialogue politics free, except for an aside here and there, because we try to use this show to give people a break from the world, including ourselves, a break from the world.
That's right. But you know what,
you might be reluctant.
You know what? As you and I are recording this, I'm looking out the big bay window of the new Brian Keene Radio Network studios, and I see a family of squirrels. There's a big fat one who's got to be the mommy, and there's 4 little squirrels, and she's teaching them how to cross the road, and I swear to God, she's teaching these squirrels how to look both ways before crossing the road. And you know what? That's what we need to do. We need to teach our younger listeners. Politics have always been in comics, so command decisions, spur of the moment. We were going to talk about supervillain team up today, beginning with issue number 10, which sees the return of, the biggest Nazi in all of Marvel Comics, the Red Skull, and in which Dr. Doom and Submariner and Captain America and Shroud team up in agreement that Nazis should always be punched. And I think instead of covering those issues, let's take an episode today and let's talk about politics and comics and which side you are on.
Right. Well, let's take a short. It's probably not going to be a long episode. No. And before we get into in general which side you're on in comics, I just want to say one thing, and I in a general sense, and you're right, to our younger listeners, but also to our contemporaries. Because I think our contemporaries, by and large, are the problem, Brian.
I agree.
And here's what I want to say. That we've spent so many years in this country, especially with our media in this country, trying to present this false equivalence of two opinions. It's my opinion, it's your opinion. That's right, left, blue, red, all of that stuff. But at the end of the day, these sides are not equivalent. And I'm going to tell you why. Not you. I'm going to tell you listeners why. The sides are not equivalent because I believe in equality and justice for every single person. I believe that no matter who you are, you should have equal opportunities under the law. You should have equal justice under the law. That no one should interfere with your rights to excel in your life, to have ambition in your life, to succeed, to live, to breathe, to eat, to love who you want to love, or any of those things. And that the law should protect you in your efforts to have that freedom of life. That is the whole point of the United States Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Independence. The entire point of what I believe, and I've always been taught when I was a child, that this country stood for. And the other side believes in the opposite of those things. So I believe in love and loving your neighbor and loving each person so that each person has their opportunity to be treated equally, to have equal justice under the law, to have an opportunity to be peaceable in their daily lives. And the other side believes that they should have the right at any time to deprive us of those rights, to deprive us of the right to peaceably assemble, to deprive us of the right to equal justice under the law, to walk down the street in a free and unharassed manner, to deprive us of our fucking lives. So don't tell me that there's an equivalency on this issue. It is not equivalent. The difference is not your opinion, my opinion. The difference is right and wrong. And if you want to be on the side of Captain America, if you want to be on the side of Luke Skywalker, if you want to be on the side of literally any fucking hero that you have ever cheered for in any fictional world, then you need to be on the side of right. And that is the side of the people who believe in equal justice and equality under the law and in the way we treat people.
Agreed. You know, you and I were talking last night, long before you spur of the moment decided to make this show political today. You know, I was watching, and it occurs to me that our listeners may not know where we are. You identify as a progressive, correct?
Fuck yeah.
Okay. I don't identify as a progressive. I identify as an independent. 9 times out of 10, I lean left on the issues, particularly when it comes to justice and equal rights and things of that.
Brian, I'm sorry. I don't want to be rude and interrupt you, but I just have to clarify here, and because I know where you're going, but I identify myself as a progressive, but I have been registered as an independent my entire life. I'm going to be 53 this year, as you know.
Right.
I've been registered as an independent. I have voted for Republicans in the past. And if we go issue by issue, there may be issues on which I'm a little bit conservative even, but never on social justice issues. But go ahead. That's
where I'm going with this. In Pennsylvania, I can't register as an independent because here during the primary, you can only vote for the party you're registered with. And if there's no independent candidate running, then I can't vote. So, but anyway, you know, an associate of mine, he's a podcaster and a radio DJ out of Portland. He said something a year ago, and he said, you know, it should not be the left versus right. It should be the people versus might. And that really struck a chord with me. Now, I have friends who identify as leaning right. I have friends who are Republican. One of my best friends, a guy I've known since high school. He's a log cabin Republican, who in the last election here in Pennsylvania, the Republicans, his own party, jeopardized his campaign just because he had married another man. And yet he's still a member of the party. But I'm not talking about Republicans here when I say this. I'm talking about Trump. I'm talking about the slow creep of fascism. I'm talking about things getting to the point where they're so abhorrent that even that Dick Tracy looking, villain looking Mitch McConnell is standing back and saying, wait a minute. Hold up now. This is how fascism starts, folks.
Yeah, I mean,
we've seen it happen over and over and over again. Now, you know, Chris and my other progressive friends lovingly tease me about being a gun nut. And it's true. I own a lot of firearms, but I'm a lawful gun owner. I'm a responsible gun owner. I'm not out, you know, modifying semi-automatic weapons and turning them automatic. I follow the law. Okay. I want to say something to my fellow Second Amendment enthusiasts out there, and to my fellow men and women who have served this country. Okay. First of all, those of us who served, we took an oath. We took an oath to protect this country from enemies, both foreign and domestic. Okay. Now, a couple weeks ago, all my fellow gun owners in the states that, have open carry laws, they open carried to their courthouses and they protested so that they could go get a haircut and they could go back to their favorite restaurant. Okay, here we are a couple weeks later, and people of color are out in the streets, okay, protesting for their right to live, for the inalienable rights that we took an oath to protect. Okay, if those people of color open carried, it would end very differently for them. Okay, so
it ends very differently from them when they're unarmed.
Exactly. So here's the thing. Okay, if you want to know where I stand, Black Lives Matter, and the Second Amendment matters. And if you support one, you have to support the other. Okay, if this son of a bitch truly wants to mobilize the military against peaceful protesters. Now, I'm not talking about, people engaged in criminal violence that results in, pain inflicted upon innocent civilians. Okay, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about what we saw last night in Lafayette Square, where peaceful protesters were fired upon so that Trump could go have a photo opportunity. Okay. If he really wants to activate the military against peaceful protesters, it is the duty of every law-abiding Second Amendment supporter in this country, be you left or right, to show up and lawfully follow the law, but lawfully protect those peaceful protesters. That is what it's coming down to, folks. Okay?
Yep. As
Chris said, if you're Captain America, then I don't know. I'm going to use the Punisher for an example. We have Marvel comics that show that, the Punisher and Captain America perhaps disagree on a lot of the issues, but when the Red Skull shows up, you're goddamn right. They put aside their differences and team up to take down the Skull.
Exactly. And in fact, I would venture to say, Brian, and I'm not, again, like, I'm not just talking out my ass here, as I usually am. If as somebody like you who has been not only reading these stories my whole life, but creating them my whole life, I can promise you that a full 90% of the villains in the Marvel universe, under these circumstances, would have helped out the protesters. They would have, they would be standing against what this so-called president is attempting to do right now. Because there are so many stories in this fictional world in which a larger threat, an existential threat to the entirety of their world. Most of these New York-based supervillains, have families in the city. And they're going to want to try to protect their families. Their uncle has a job that they want to protect, or their child goes to a school that they want to protect. So those are criminals, not the Galactuses of the Marvel universe. But so when even most of the bad guys would be against your side, you're on the wrong fucking side.
That's right. And folks, I want to stress, okay, and I know I'm in the minority when it comes to this, but I'm not going to judge you if you voted for Trump, okay? I know a lot of people that voted for Trump, okay? That's neither here nor there. I'm not castigating you for how you voted, but I will castigate you for if at this point your pride stops you, prevents you from opening your eyes and looking around and saying, okay, yeah, you know what? I helped put him into power, but what's happening is wrong. Yeah. I think back to Chris Claremont's classic X-Men story, God Loves, Man Kills. Chris, if you don't remember it, up until that point, Magneto had been portrayed, as a raving lunatic villain, a mutant supremacist, really. Right. And with God Loves, Man Kills, it opens with this young boy of color, this young black boy, strung up on a playground, not just because he's black, but because he's a mutant. And it's done by these Homo sapien supremacists. And it's not the X-Men who finds him; it's Magneto, and that moment leads to Magneto approaching Professor X and the X-Men and saying, we need to put our differences aside and fight this monstrosity together. And that's exactly what happens. And that's where we're at in this country, folks. Next week, when we get into supervillain team up 10 and 11 and 12, Dr. Doom is the bad guy. Okay. Captain America and Namor and Shroud are the good guys.
And although Namor has been a bad guy as well.
Yeah. When the Red Skull shows up, there's some beautiful panels that we're going to talk about next week. Captain America and Doom are, but to paraphrase, they look at each other and are like, yeah, fuck this. He's a Nazi. Let's punch him together.
Exactly. Exactly. And I have to say, Brian, look, unlike you, and I want to be crystal clear here. Unlike you, I do blame every single person who voted for and or supported Donald Trump in his run for the presidency. I think that every single one of those people shares responsibility for every single thing we're seeing happen right now. However, just like you're talking about, I do blame you if you're listening to this and you voted for Trump. But that doesn't mean that it's too late for you to do something good. And you can be angry with me for everything I've ever said on this topic, but that doesn't mean that you need to channel that anger in continuing to defend the indefensible.
Yep.
It is never too late for anybody, pardon me, and never too late for anybody to turn around and say, "Oh, this is too much." And also, I want to say that, to be honest, I have been distraught and furious with the people who, over the last 4 years, or 4.5 to 5 years since this all began, who have told me, who are supposed to be progressive, but who have always said to me on social media, "You're panicking, people, calm down, it's fine." And I try to take things with a grain of salt and all that kind of stuff. And I step back and I'm like, well, maybe they're right. But there are those of us who saw this day and the days to come coming from a long distance. And now it gives me no pleasure to have been correct, but I want to make sure that those people stand up and say, not I was right, not the people were right that said these things, but stand up now and say what needs to be said.
This day has been coming since 9/11. And I understand, folks, I'm not talking about conspiracy theories here. You didn't tune into Coast to Coast AM. I'm talking provable facts. Google the Project for the New American Century. Some of the authors involved were, before they were famous, were Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld, and some of the people in Trump's cabinet who are currently serving. This document was written at the end of the 90s, and it was talking about how America could maintain its empire and superiority in the new millennium. And it outlines pretty much what we've seen happen since 9/11. It outlines them as hypothetical scenarios, but they've happened like clockwork. It's like a checklist.
Yeah. But we're not an empire anymore, Brian. I mean, it's done.
No, yeah, we're not. Um,
You look at the way the world is looking with horror and pity on America right now, and and it's done. And
yeah, and again, I say to the folks in rural America, I say to my neighbors, people who I know, people who I've grown up with, I get it. You were desperate. You were scared. There aren't any jobs here. There's nothing. And our education system sucks. And as a result, this guy who from television comes along and he speaks a language that you understand. He's not and you said, yeah, fuck it, let's let him pilot the plane for a while. Okay, I'm not going to judge you for that, but he is driving the plane towards the mountain, and the mountain is coming up, and in a few days, it's going to be too late to turn that plane back. Now is the time to stand up and say, you know what? Yes, I take responsibility. I helped put him into power, but this cannot stand. What can I do to help?
Yeah.
And I would say you could help in November by voting him out of office. Quite frankly, I don't know that we'll have an election in November.
I agree. I was saying that to my wife Connie this morning. And again, this is that thing where, you go back to January when I was talking to my family and other people about and tweeting about coronavirus, and everyone was like, "No, that's not," telling me I'm crazy. And here we are. But I think that unless something significant is done, and I don't see anyone on the horizon with the ability or willingness to do anything, I think it's entirely likely that we don't have an election in November. And if we do have an election, I think it's entirely likely that the whole thing is rigged. I actually think that the only thing that is helping us in the prospect of having a real election in November is the fact that we have more time. We have July, August, September, October, 5 months until we have an election. So, if it were 3 months, I would say I really feel like we won't have one. But anyway, that aside, let me just say this. I also understand. Many of the people who voted for Trump. I understand why they voted for him. I understand the circumstances that you just described. I understand the desperation and the confusion and the need for someone that they felt was going to look out for them. But it is patently clear. It must be clear at this point that he was never looking out for you, that he's never looking out for anyone other than himself and the people who can enrich him.
I think it is clear. Unfortunately, I also see witnessed here where I live. While it is clear, I think a mixture of pride and shame prevents many people from admitting that out loud. Right. Might they admit it in the privacy of the polling station or the ballot box? Sure.
Right.
But
maybe, or they just won't go.
Yeah, that's in November, folks, and bad things are happening now.
Exactly.
And if you think, well, sure, I think Black Lives Matter, but this is happening in cities. It doesn't impact me. Yeah, it does. It's going to impact your children for decades to come. I mean, this shit should have stopped in our lifetime, Chris, with Rodney King.
Yep.
What was that, 92?
Yep.
But here we are, we're still dealing with it. And your children and your grandchildren are going to have to deal with it unless you take a stand now. It's not about left versus right. It's people versus might. And right now, we are living in a police state. And
Right.
and it's
Well, we're living in a situation, police state, we're living in a situation where the police and the authorities can and will do whatever the fuck they want to you, and they can and will set up circumstances where they can set the narrative and paint you however they want to paint you. And so, yeah, Brian, I agree with you that it can't wait until November. And it is this thing. I understand that, like someone in a long-term affair or, someone with a gambling addiction or any other kind of addiction, at a certain point, your mind clears for a minute and you realize, what you've done and where you are. But you're so far down the road into this that to allow your mind to stay clear means accepting that you're on the wrong road.
Yep.
And I think that this is one of the big hurdles that people face when they're attempting to push aside their anger and guilt and fear and recognize that they've been on the wrong road and where we stand now and what's happened. I mean, the America that every hero at to get back to this, whether it's a comic book superhero or heroes in your favorite films, the America that they're supposed to be fighting for, never completely existed, particularly for people of color. But certainly the hope of that America, the hope of striving for that America, is being burnt to the ground right now.
Yep. Agreed.
So
that's our show for this week. A little different from what we normally do here on Defenders Dialogue, but we hope you will indulge us. Quite frankly, I don't care if you indulge us or not. It needed to be said. I know it was on both of our hearts.
Yep.
And we're going to take this platform and do it. But next week, we'll get back to comic books. Supervillain Team Up issues 10, 11, and 12, which are very political.
Yep.
I want to point out to the Comicsgate folks out there listening, we don't want politics in comics. Well, they've always been there.
That's right. And you know what I say to the Comicsgate folks, Brian? I say, fuck you. But listen, all I will say, Brian, on that note is, if you believe in heroes, if you have rooted for Captain America, Iron Man, our friends, the Defenders, the Champions, all that kind of stuff, then you know what side of this story you should fall on.
Exactly.
And with that,
even Dr. Doom knows which side.
Exactly. Even Dr. Doom. His name, folks, is Dr. Doom. Let me say that again. His name is Dr. Doom.
And even he punches Nazis.
Exactly. And on that note, I will say, Excelsior, true believers.
We'll see you next week, folks.
Defenders Dialogue is a production of the Brian Keene Radio Network. You can listen to this episode and all previous episodes for free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, YouTube, Google Play Music, and wherever else podcasts are available. Defenders Dialogue is written and produced by Brian Keene and Christopher Golden. Our theme music is by Xander Harris. Our engineer is Matt Wilderson. Check out his books on Amazon.com. If you enjoyed this show, you might enjoy our other podcasts, The Horror Show with Brian Keene, Cosmic Shenanigans, and Grindcast. To advertise on Defenders Dialogue, visit briankeene.com and click Podcasts.